What's up, everyone? Welcome to another Kung Fu Talk. I hope it's your favorite martial arts podcast. Starting here straight from California, San Francisco. So I want to ask you to please comment, share, subscribe, share your thoughts, share what you think about our show. Any respectful criticism is very well taken. I don't mind as long as you guys are, professional on your comments as well. But share is a good thought and good things that you guys think about it. And any guests that you guys have it in mind, you guys would like to have it in our show, please feel free to also comment and try to get in touch with them. So this show is going to be on YouTube and Spotify. Make sure if you're listening on Spotify, go over there on YouTube. There's going to be the links of our guests. If you want to have any idea or if you want to know a little bit more about our person that we are interviewing with, maybe he's the guy is in your location, want to take online classes or personal classes, you can just go ahead and get in touch with him personally, right? This show is sponsored by Feilong Design Hub, which is a martial arts printing. It's on Amazon. You can go ahead on Amazon. The link's going to be in the description. If you like martial arts graphic tees, hoodies, thermical cups, there's also pop socket, phone cases, many different cool stuff. Just get over there, many different styles. So there's judo, Shuai Jiao, Kung Fu, Chinese wrestling. There's many different styles over there. So if you like to represent your style, just go check it out. It's out also on Redbubble, TeePublic, and Etsy. All right, so they ship around the world. Make sure that you just make a login, you just make an account, and it's gonna be good there. All right, so I have the honor for today having a conversation, a Kung Fu martial arts conversation with Coach Tye. How are you doing today, Coach?
Good, I'm well. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much for being part of the show. And as I was telling, offline, I'm a big fan of your work. I love how, with excellence and respect and honor, you represent Shuai Jiao. I wish Shuai Jiao could be more public to people so people could know more as you do, and that's where I try to see if you can help you promote this art as well. We have a really good audience, and we're going to be talking about your martial arts experience, not only Shuai Jiao, but Asanda too. And I love what you do. I love what you post, and then I really want to know a little bit about yourself, about your background. So, what inspired you to start practicing Shuai Jiao and Sanda?
So I started Chinese martial arts at a pretty young age. I had done like Kempo karate as a very small child for a few years. And then pretty early on, I switched to traditional Kung Fu and Tai Chi Chuan. And the first school that I really trained at seriously also was a big kickboxing school. So we did quite a lot of boxing, kickboxing, Sanda, right away when I first started. So on the Sanda side of things, it was really my first coach when I started doing Kung Fu, suggesting that I try to do some of the Sanda to try to get a better understanding and the feeling for like the application of a lot of the stuff that we were training. And then in terms of Shuai Jiao, just sort of in conjunction with learning Kung Fu and learning Tai Chi, it was always something that I was interested in and had done here and there a little sort of throughout the years, but didn't really get into a lot of really heavy, serious practice until the last decade or so. That was something that when I started to train a little bit more seriously, I really started to like seek out some instructors and coaches to sort of help my progress along. But largely for me, it was the application of the stuff that I had been learning since I was 12 years old, trying to like better understand Kung Fu and Tai Chi Chuan. And yeah, that's sort of I've been involved in it, in one way or another from sort of the beginning of my my training career.
It's impressive. Yeah. Something that I think it's very important that a lot of kung fu practitioner doesn't see that much value on Shuai Jiao. And if you see, I would say maybe 70 to 60% of the movements of the traditional forms are Shuai Jiao applications. Ever since I started practicing Shuai Jiao, the forms, the Kyunfas and the Taolus was like explicit how that movement was not a strike, it was exactly a takedown. And
Mm.
that blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, like my entire life I thought this was just like, a low strike or something. You can adapt it according to the situation. But the real application, when you see, especially when you study deeply to the art, you see a lot of connection through Sanda, through Shuai Jiao and other systems. Especially Tai Chi as well has a lot of takedowns as well.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I would say like most of our Shuai Jiao is really is represented in our Taiji Chuan. So like we
Hmm.
primarily focus on Yang style Taiji Chuan. Stylistically, because of the sort of close range, the sticking, and a lot of the sensitivity that's built into those systems, those styles. There's a lot of locking and there's a lot of throwing. It's definitely very wrestling and kind of grappling oriented. But there's a large conversation, I think, coming from a lot of folks talking about like the applicability of traditional kung fu and even just like historically how much of it actually was influenced by grappling, like how much did people really emphasize the throws, the wrestling component to what they're doing. And like certainly there's striking, there's kicking, there's locking, and there's wrestling, right? Like that's the tida na shuai that we a lot of times talk about in traditional martial arts is like what makes like the complete system. And I think the striking and the kicking is the easiest to see, especially in sequences and in forms, because it's just visually, right? When you're doing something with the upper body in particular, you throw a kick, it looks very much, oh, okay, that looks like a strike and that looks like a kick. But a lot of this stuff that we're, across so many styles in Chinese martial arts is you're just kind of learning mechanics. Like you're learning like an operating system to access certain types of power generations, root and connection, and your ability to move in certain positions. And so I think there's so much applicability when you start really looking at Shuai Jiao, whether you're doing Shuai Jiao just as like you can do this as just like a competitive sport if that's something that people are interested in. But when you start to tie it into a lot of what we do traditionally, um, yeah, there's so much in the traditional movements that directly applies to what you're going to be doing in Shuai Jiao, like actually trying to wrestle and grapple and connect with somebody and to get that throw. There's been countless times where I've been studying with my training partners and we've been working on something and something finally comes through. You get like a technique or something in Shuai Jiao and you go like, oh, this mechanic, this movement that I've been doing for years in a sequence, maybe thinking it was one thing or maybe just not really understanding what it is. I've been told I got to do this movement and low stance and this. And then all of a sudden it just like opens up this whole world of like, oh, that's how you can apply that movement. That's how you can apply that concept. And I would say the same thing goes for a lot of Sanda, even though maybe the format looks different than what we expect out of like traditional Kung Fu. The application, right? It's at the end of the day, like when you actually get to test this stuff a little bit and you get to play with it and like interact with the material in a more direct way, it's fun to sort of see how that opens up. Like, oh yeah, I've been doing this for years, and now all of a sudden I'm actually like applying it. Like this is how these movements are able to be applied, or at least one way that they're able to be applied.
Exactly. And not only that, there's many scholars that says that, the first martial arts system evolved in China was pretty much the Chinese wrestling, and then it started evolving through the names and then through the styles, and then that's what we have through nowadays. It became a sport, but back in the days was exactly like a fighting method for for warfare, for wars, where the people use as a self-defense method. And it's impossible, as I tell people, like if you guys could see how much value there's into Shuai Jiao compared to what we have into traditional kung fu, you're gonna see kung fu right there. Like I've seen many people, oh yeah, I don't like wrestling, I don't like to be grabbing people, but that's pretty much what's gonna happen if you start a self-defense encounter with somebody in the street. And if you have the ability and the training to see beyond what you've been doing into the forms, you're going to be more effective, not only for a self-defense perspective, but also for a competition-wise perspective. It's impossible to practice Sanda without, the takedowns, without the Shuai Jiao takedowns. And if you are, a Shuai Jiao practitioners, you are way far beyond than other people. I've seen a lot of people, especially national teams. I love to watch the fights. I love to watch the videos on YouTube. And I've seen that there's a lot of people, they are just focusing to Sanda and they forget a little bit of, the Shuai Jiao perspective. And then those that balance, I forgot the name of this fighter. That was a fighter, really good one from, I forgot from where he was from, but he did his takedowns were like amazing. I was like, well, that's incredible. The guy is good in striking. The guy is good in the takedown because the perspective of Shuai Jiao and the wrestling perspective is all about just not throwing someone. You have to do a preset. As my Sifu said, like you have to take his balance first because otherwise you're gonna be doing strength and you're gonna be exhausted like after 10-15 seconds of trying to push your opponent to the floor. But when
For
you have the
sure.
perfect technique, just rolling around, just try to take him, it's like jujitsu, like the techniques itself, like the fighting tactics. I mean, the fighting tactics. I'm trying to say, you have to, sometimes release something here to try to grab there, and then to go to the legs, and, stuff like that. It's beautiful art. It's a beautiful art.
Oh, for sure. I definitely see like so like in our Sanda that we teach in our program, right? The emphasis is really on the wrestling. Like it's the thing that tends to set us apart from a lot of other like kickboxing styles or combat sports, is really that wrestling component, right? So it's punch, kick, throw. We have like those three elements. The easiest thing to sort of learn or interact with is always almost always your hands, right? Learning some of the basic striking is where everybody kind of starts because your hands are right there, they're ready to go, and you can start to refine it a little bit easier. Kicking tends to be a little bit harder for people. This is certainly something that we see, like I see as a coach and developing students. Your legs are a little bit trickier to get under you, so to speak, where you're standing on one leg and it's a bigger motion, especially when you get into competition. I think everybody kind of gets this feeling like they can kind of throw their hands, but their legs feel really heavy. And then the last bit to sort of get developed tends to be the Shuai element, right? The wrestling element. And for us, our training is really developed to try to get to that, because if you can control that transition in grappling and sort of closing the distance, grabbing somebody and throwing them, if you can misalign them, if you can find the timing, you have a huge advantage. Now, on a sport side, for most Sanda, the throws score the most, right? Where striking doesn't score quite as much, and then kicking usually falls somewhere in between. So for us, like our training system, the way that we talk about strategies, which I think is really important, right? Techniques are fantastic, but understanding the strategies and the tactics that you're actually going to utilize within your match or within your fight, the things that you're setting up, how to set up environments. We use our striking and our kicking really to manage getting into like a range and into a position where you can execute your wrestling. Now, I think the tricky part with the wrestling in Sanda is that it has to happen so fast. And you have to constantly keep in mind that there's still striking and there's still kicking involved. You can't just like totally shut off and kind of build the feeling for wrestling. And because that's the case when we get into the wrestling, once we actually get there in the Sanda curriculum, it's sometimes tough to develop the feeling, right? Because you have to move so quickly. That's just like the way that art and that sport really approaches it, because again, you have to worry about someone breaking away and throwing punches or throwing kicks, and you really only have a couple of seconds to try to execute some sort of throw. Whereas in Shuai Jiao, where you're, especially with the jacket, if you're able to grab and spend time trying to figure out how to misalign somebody and how much you need to misalign them and how they're going to fight, how they're going to resist when you try to misalign them, and you can constantly work at that one goal without worrying about those other elements, you develop the feeling for it much deeper, and you can become much more dynamic with it. So I think because we, like my programs at the school that I teach at, we offer both, right? We offer Shuai Jiao and Sanda, and I would say 95% almost of our students do both arts, at least a little bit. And what you find is you get to develop the feeling for wrestling in Shuai Jiao much deeper and much more effectively. And then by the time you have sort of your striking and your kicking, and you understand how to use your striking to set up shooting in or getting into a clinch and getting into that wrestling component. Now you've already developed the feeling from Shuai Jiao. Your wrestling is much easier on your sort of on that learning curve, because it can be really difficult in Sanda. But you have to understand that feeling, right? You have to understand how to misalign somebody, the timing, how to move the weight in their feet, how to sort of tip the top before you take the bottom. And so I think doing both kind of burns the candle at both ends, and you end up having like a really, really solid system. Because even within Sanda today, especially like in the States, when you start to see it, you don't see sort of that high level of wrestling. And it certainly should have it, I think, because the system is really designed to get you there. But it can be difficult. So I think there's a ton of value in really focusing on both and being able to develop the feeling for both.
When you're talking about the feeling, right, and in the States, the way that they promote, you're talking about Sanda or Shuai Jiao itself? Like,
well, really both. To be frank, right? Like both Sanda and Shuai Jiao as arts, kind of on their own, require a high level of sensitivity, right? They require the development of feeling so that it's not just kickboxing with like a Western wrestling take, right? If you're talking about like a truly unique art, something that's coming from Chinese martial arts and has the feeling for Chinese martial arts, like again, the key word there being the feeling. And it's hard to develop that, right? Something that happens is people focus so much on techniques. Right, I need my technique to look like this. I need to be able to do these big overhead throws, and I need to put my foot here and the hand here, and I need to have a partner who's very compliant to help me train these techniques over and over and over again. But as an art, that doesn't necessarily give you the feeling of how to do that against like a resistive opponent, right? Both in Sanda and in Shuai Jiao. So even in Shuai Jiao, if you are training a lot of techniques, and if you have a ton of techniques, but you don't ever really get it to the point where you feel how to utilize those techniques live, it's hard to understand like the direction you should be taking in your training. So that's on Shuai Jiao. That's like one aspect that you can think about for Shuai Jiao specifically. But on the side of Sanda, because there's that wrestling component, if you're not doing Shuai Jiao at least a little bit on the side, it's even harder to develop the feeling because you don't have quite as much time to play with that material, right? You might learn the techniques. Okay, you shoot in, you grab the leg, you hike it down, or you lift them up, or you catch the kick and you sweep them here, or you turn and reap and lift their legs, or whatever the technique might be. But you have to do it so quickly that it's hard to sort of feel what's happening. You don't build like this tactile feeling for the moment so that you know, does it make sense to input the technique right now? Not just that you have a technique you can try, but is this the right moment to put this technique in, or what technique should you put in? So on Sanda, like there's a lot of value in doing a little bit of study of just Shuai Jiao, where you take out the striking and kicking elements so that you can develop that a little bit deeper. And then even just within Shuai Jiao itself, right, we want to make sure that if we're trying to like really show some applicability in the art, whether it's competitively, like you want to compete, or simply you want to understand the art better, like you really want to understand what it feels like, but you have to invest a little bit of time in the way that you train and making sure that your training systems support developing that feeling, that live feeling, and not just accumulating information, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Now I want to ask you actually a personal question regarding what do you think about, this arts as being promoted? Because the way that I see sometimes, without much, without the respect to, any martial artists in school that are watching us, in a general perspective, especially United States, when it comes about, promoting Shuai Jiaos and Sanda, especially Sanda, I've seen people, sometimes they don't even know what Sanda is, and sometimes they don't even know, I've seen people, they wake up, they are a kickboxing instructor, Muay Thai instructor, they wake up next day, and then they are Sanda instructor, which they never have touched gloves with, such martial artists. Do you think maybe this lack, I wouldn't say of a lack of promoting in a bad sense, but of promoting in an excellent way, Do you think maybe it's because Shuai Jiao, I mean, not Shuai Jiao that much, because I've seen many Shuai Jiao schools, they at least have a grade, rank system where they have the technique separated. But Sanda, in my opinion, with all due respect, is all over the place. I've seen people,
Mm.
as I mentioned, like they wake up tomorrow, okay, so now I'm a Sanda instructor. And I've seen other countries, like the people, they have a grade material, they have a rank material. So they have takedowns separated really good in each grade so they can focus on what to practice. It's not just simply kickboxing or a Muay Thai instructor that are teaching Sanda.
Yeah, this is like an interesting subject, right? Because it's sort of somewhat poses the question, like, what is Sanda? Like, is it a style? Is it an expression? Is it sparring? Is it a competition format? Like, is it a rule set? And like, it's a complicated answer too, right? Because it is a little bit of all of those things. But I think largely what happens is we have a little lack of a structured system for Sanda. Like there's not as many schools or coaches that have really gone through a system, or even competed or helped develop or went through a developed system that is a little bit more encompassing of what Sanda is, as like an operating system. Again, is usually how I sort of language it. It's like you're gaining access to something. Because certainly what I could say for our Sanda system, it's very closely related to our traditional Chinese martial arts, right? So our traditional Kung Fu. But it isn't just learning traditional Kung Fu and then sparring, right? It's its own system of learning where you're not just learning forms and then learning applications and then trying to spar and kind of figure it out. There's a development here, right? There's understanding distance management and footwork beyond just like footwork patterns, but actually like what kind of footwork is going to give you these angles in relation to somebody and when do you use them, right? It has a more focus on like tactics over techniques, strategies, something that we had just touched on a little bit earlier. But there's not like any unified system for that, right? Some countries have like a grading system that goes for like some sort of world federation or association that they have. But we definitely are lacking that a little bit, at least in the United States. And so it's tough because it's a little bit of a gamble, right? Like if you see someone that's like offering Sanda, it's hard to say like, is it like pro style Sanda? Is it tournament or sport style Sanda? Is it like Kung Fu Sanda where it's their sparring class? And like very few times will you find like a Sanda gym, right? Like an entire gym where all of their programming is based around developing Sanda, right? It's usually like an auxiliary class or something. Even if it's an MMA gym or a Muay Thai gym that may have a coach that comes in, maybe it's only once a week or twice a week and it's one class for an hour. That is difficult to teach people everything that Sanda as a system itself really has to offer, specifically as a combat sport, right? There's so much to understanding combat sport. And there's a problem with just doing like Muay Thai or kickboxing and maybe learning a little bit of wrestling, whether it comes from like Western wrestling, judo or something, and then saying like, oh, well, Sanda is kind of a rule set of punching, kicking, and wrestling. I'm going to make my own sort of Sanda system. And people can do whatever they want. But the problem with that is it is not developing a system that was incorporating all of those things from the get-go, right? So something like the way that you stand, like basics, right? First class, you learn your stance, your guard, and basic footwork. Well, if your stance and guard are coming from another style that didn't incorporate wrestling before, it might not be the best base for a system that's then going to have wrestling. Or you may find that you have difficulties when you get into like shots and sprawls, the way that you would do shots and sprawls in Sanda specifically. And the same thing goes for wrestling. If you're doing like a lot of what we call like drop shots or wrestler shots, right? Where you go heel, toe, knee, and you shoot in, you grab a leg and you lift them up. Well, in an art where you're not allowed to put your knee down on the ground, right? You have to stay standing on your feet. You can't just simply take the mechanics and the understanding of wrestling from a wrestling style and just immediately input it into a kickboxing style and have it seamlessly work, right? So you're going to come into some issues there. So like for me, like a good Sanda system is developed right from the get-go with those understandings that everything that you do needs to be sort of a cohesive system that is working towards your ending goal. Like, what does your finished product look like? Okay, I want like a kickboxing style that has really great wrestling. Well, that's your end, right? But how did you, like, what are the steps that get you there? Is it just doing sequences and then all of a sudden you're sparring? Is it taking Muay Thai and then just adding some judo? Like, you have to think about that system, and we don't always get that right. It's hard because, again, like, there is no unified system here, and everybody is, you want to believe what you have is like the best, right? Like, nobody's going into a school and going, oh, you want to learn? Well, we do okay, but we really don't have the best stuff, right? Everybody's school is the best style of that style that it's ever existed. Like, nobody's teaching and trying to promote themselves and make a business work by saying like, well, we're okay, but we're not the greatest, right? So like, everybody's sort of saying like, yeah, we have it. Like, we have the material. However, one way that you can kind of work around that is competition, right? And so a lot of the issue comes from that. Like, we don't have a whole lot of competition opportunities here, where that's kind of where things come out in the wash, right? Like, if you have a really good system and you have really good coaches that can relay that information and actually get it into somebody else where they can use it and access it, well, let's grab some of the other schools and let's get some matchups and see like how students do or how schools do, and that sort of helps filter out a little bit what works and what doesn't. But if you don't have competition, or the nearest competition is 6 hours away or whatever it may be, and it's only once a year, it can be difficult to promote quality when it comes to like Sanda specifically, right? So it is something that I think we're starting to see a little bit of a trend change. Like, this is like a whole other topic, but in the modern day where you can go online and see everybody's systems and everybody's styles and schools on YouTube, right? You can go and look up Sanda that's happening in China. You can look at Sanda that's happening, in Spain or wherever it may be, and say, oh, this is what these guys are doing. This is what it looks like. Here's them competing. This is what they're talking about. And then you can look at, all right, what kind of content is being made down the road at my local school and kind of compare. And I think because of that, there has in recent years been a little bit more of a spotlight on like what quality looks like in some of these arts, and kind of put a little light in that there are systems that are a little bit better developed that are like truly indicative of what Sanda really is, right? To make that its own system of training where you can access and apply the things that you're doing. And so like, we are getting a little bit more in terms of competition, but there's a little give and take on, we need the opportunities, but we also need the participants to kind of fill out the other end. So it's slow for sure, but I definitely think that you talked about like promotion and things like that. It is starting to turn a little bit. I would say in the last 5 years, even, we've started to see like more interest accumulate. That's really the big thing, is people are like looking for different things now. And when you start looking for Sanda, you can see what's happening in Sanda all over the world. And then you can kind of find something that might be close to you, but you now have something to compare it against a little bit more than you did 10 or 15 years ago, where maybe that stuff wasn't quite as accessible on like a bigger scale.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much for this insight. Yeah, I share the same opinion. I've seen like many different things, especially when you compare Sanda to Shuai Jiao. The organization, the different styles of Shuai Jiao, super organized. Even that people treat exactly as a Shuai Jiao style, but is also as a form of competition. When it comes about, Sanda, you see, unfortunately, we have great athletes in national teams and everything, but unfortunately, particularly in the individual, of course, I'm not going to be here pointing fingers, but sometimes we see like, okay, I teach Kung Fu, and then after this belt level, you learn Sanda. I was like, wait a minute, so why is not the same with Shuai Jiao, but in Sanda, people are mixing up, Sanda with tradition. I mean, as you say, everybody can do whatever they want. But as far as promoting, pushing quality, and then going beyond that, what we can be, if you know what I'm saying, getting into a level, because United States, we have great athletes. We are, good in everything, but we should be way more advanced when it comes about this. I've seen without the respect, third world countries, like, I'm from Brazil, and they have really great fighters over there. I
Absolutely.
went personally to the Pan American last year, and these people were destroying. I was like, what the heck, bro? Like we should be, without the respect, we should be like way beyond these guys. Like, what's going on
Yeah.
with us?
Yeah, it's tricky. Again, man, part of that is it takes time to develop fighters,
Yeah,
right? Like it doesn't happen overnight, and there's plenty of people that want to have that, right? They would like to say, that they're a Sanda fighter and that they're a high quality, high level Sanda fighter. But it's tricky. You got to get good programs. You have to have good coaches, and you have to have good students. Like it's a tricky balance because it doesn't happen overnight, right? No matter how much you want it, if you're not putting in that work, and that is hours in the gym, and because there's like being a smart martial artist, having the material in your head, but then getting it in the body and being athletic, then it's takes time to develop that. So again, like we're starting to see it. We do have some good athletes, and we're starting to see a little more Sanda come out more in the mainstream, where with other countries primarily bringing some Sanda fighters into some of like the bigger like MMA fight promotions and things like that. This is like a big place where, again, like nowadays with social media and stuff, and you see like Team Lakai coming into one championship, and you see these Sanda fighters doing really well and becoming champions. People going like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know that I've really heard of that style. And then they kind of look into it, and now they have something to compare it to. And there is some interest, but it'll still take a couple of years at the very least for it to kind of evolve at least into its next phase while people start to develop the skill. So, yeah.
Exactly. So going back to Shuai Jiao, sorry for my pronunciation if I'm spelling it wrong. The Bökh is considered Mongolian national sports. How does it differ in philosophy and competition structure from the Shuai Jiao?
Oh, so Bökh and Shuai Jiao. So Bökh is like Mongolian wrestling. Shuai Jiao is Chinese wrestling. Now, there's certainly plenty of debate about history and evolution of style. There's myself included, a lot of folks that are of the feeling that Shuai Jiao that we have today comes from the development of both the Mongolian wrestlers and the Manchu wrestlers, sort of passing down what they were doing into the imperial wrestlers, and then kind of that spreading throughout, and it mixed a little with kung fu and so on and so forth. So there's like a pretty like weaved together history of these two things. But Bökh, the Mongolian wrestling that you'll see today, like there's two main styles, essentially inner and outer Mongolian, or like Janga Bökh and Khalkha Bökh. The outer Mongolian, like national wrestling that you see, they have the wrestling jackets that they wear. You'll see they're like long sleeved but open chested. There's like a belt that ties like around the middle of the body, and they all have shorts and boots. This is probably what you'll see in outer Mongolia most. There's a ton of different styles of Mongolian wrestling, but like this is the big main style that you'll see. And then what you'll see in inner Mongolia, sometimes it's called like Janga Bökh, you'll see like a leather jacket a lot of times with studs. That's basically like a sleeve, and then it's kind of cut across the back, and it comes down, and there's a belt. And they wear pants and boots. And so these are like the two big styles that you'll see that you can kind of like find online. We started studying inner Mongolian wrestling, inner Mongolian Bökh, over the pandemic, working with Lavelle Marshall, who a lot of folks know. American Hung Guy is his handle online, who actually moved to China to do Shuai Jiao, and ended in Inner Mongolia and started learning Bökh. And then his teacher at the time wanted to start sharing it with the Westerners, and we started doing things online and studying with him, and kind of took things from there. In terms of like approach and styles in competition, for Inner Mongolian Bökh, it's a very unique system. It's a very unique style. So the things that kind of set it apart is there's no weight class, right? So if somebody's 200 pounds heavier than you still wrestle them. Whoever you're against is who you're against. There's no weight class. There's also no time limit. So it's not like you have a 2-3 minute rounds where you're trying to accumulate points. And to that, there's also not a point system other than once something other than your feet hits the ground, that's it, you're out. That's you only need one throw. It doesn't matter how you do it. Nothing but your feet can touch the ground. Whoever touches the ground first is out of the competition. And there's no like redemption round. So once you're out, you're out. And it's just down to last man standing. So it makes the style very unique and very, very difficult because it's very high stakes, right? Like if it's your first round and you go out and you rush out there and you're ready to go and all of a sudden someone kind of trips you and your hand touches the ground, well, that's it. You're done for the day, right? You're out of the competition. So you see like the pacing and the approach itself, because of that rule set, is very different from things like Chinese wrestling, Shuai Jiao, where there's a lot more happening. You have to go a lot faster. And if you get thrown, maybe it's 1 or 2 points, well, you get back up and you keep going, right? You're trying to get the most amount of points accumulated in a time frame. So for Inner Mongolian Bökh, right, because of that rule set, the way that you interact, your upper body deals with just the upper body. Your lower body deals with the lower body. So your hands can't grab the legs. So there's no like ankle picks or knee seizes or anything like that. And it's primarily based around the grips. So understanding how to grab the jacket and manipulate the jacket to put pressure and set up an opportunity, to get setups in misaligning somebody. And then the lower body, for the most part, interacts with the lower body to get your trips and sweeps, blocks, and hooks and things like that. This is very much where that feeling that we talked about earlier comes into play, because especially with no weight class, no time limit, it's really high risk to do something and get countered. There's a lot of countering in Bökh. So you have to be patient, right? So sometimes it looks like not a lot is even happening in a match. They're just kind of standing there making these little teeny adjustments because you're waiting for the perfect moment to execute your technique, because it has to work, right? You have to make sure that that person is going to not be able to counter you and that you're going to get your throw. So you develop this extremely high level of sensitivity. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And that's something that is very different from anything that usually I experience. And interestingly enough, it's what I found was the most direct application of what we talk about in Tai Chi Chuan, is sensitivity and feeling. When you do push hands drills, all the different things that you learn in that style is really being applied in Mongolian wrestling. So again, no time limit. You're out there. If you're wrestling for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, sometimes even longer, right? That's how long it takes until you get one throw. And it's a very, tight sort of stringent rule set. And it develops the system based around that, right? So like the things that you emphasize, having that sensitivity, feeling when the right moment is to input a technique rather than sort of forcing a technique that may be countered and things like that. And certainly things like strength and speed are important, but it's not everything, right? Because again, if you have someone that's 250 pounds heavier, your strength is important, but it's not going to be the only factor at that point. You still have to wrestle. And one of the things that they tell you right away is don't fear the big guys and don't count out the small ones, right? Size does count, but it doesn't count for everything. And you will be surprised that, like, when you start to study Bökh, if you start to watch those matches, those Nadam, the competitions, you'll see some small competitors take some really big competitors down with technique, because their feeling is developed to such a high level that they're able to put the right thing in the right place at the right time. And there's a whole mental game that goes with it. Mongolian wrestling is one of the most unique, truly unique styles, especially of wrestling, that I've ever experienced. It's the thing that probably interests me the most, that I'm studying myself. And for me, studying Mongolian wrestling has made my Chinese wrestling just a million times better. I mean, this is the easiest thing I could say is studying Bökh made Shuai Jiao much, much better for me. I was able to understand it at a much higher level, and see like, oh, there's a lot of levels to this, right? This goes really, really deep, way beyond what we've got and way beyond my own skill. And I can just keep digging forever. Like it's truly like a lifetime of practice, like most styles say. there's some difference here in the outer Mongolian national wrestling where you can grab the legs in that style. It's still no weight class. There's still no time limit. It's still one throw puts the person out. But now you can grab the legs. So it does change a little bit their approach. And also something that's a bit different is their hand is allowed to touch the ground. You can't put your forearm or your elbow or your knee down, but your feet can touch the ground, your hand can touch the ground. So sometimes like the way that they're able to fight out of something or the way they're able to frame or stabilize changes a little bit. And then the different jacket is still has a lot of gripping that you have to learn. But it has a much different feel. Like the jacket comes across like the rib cage a little bit more. So like your anchor point on grabbing like the belt is a little bit different in the middle. And then like what you can grab on the upper part of the jacket and having it be cloth instead of just leather changes a little bit how it manipulates in your hand. And something that both styles have that is different than Shuai Jiao, almost in the same way that Shuai Jiao is different from like say judo, is how tight the jacket is. So something that a lot of people don't understand or don't expect is like maybe you played a little judo or jujitsu and you have like the feeling of a gi. You're like, oh, I understand jacketed wrestling. And then when you have a Shuai Jiao jacket on and it's, you know, short sleeved and much tighter, it's like, oh, this is weird. Like I don't have the same leverage as I would. I don't have like a long handle on someone's wrist to snap down. I can't pull something across the body the same way. And it can be difficult for people to make that adjustment. When you grab a Mongolian wrestling jacket, it is like having a straight jacket on. It's like when you're grabbed, it is the tightest thing you could imagine. And trying to get it is much more difficult because of how tight it is. There's just no slack. There's like very little to grab onto. But to that point, the thing that really differentiates it, like I said, is going to be like sensitivity and feeling and gripping. Your gripping has to get better in Mongolian wrestling. It is so important. It's definitely the first thing that you notice. Like you have to get good at gripping. You have to understand gripping theory, where to grab, what grips outweigh other grips for certain positions and movements, how to manipulate the person, right? Because you can't just grab the legs. You can't just like bull rush in. You have to be very particular about what you do. But then you can translate that into a jacket with a little more slack where it's kind of hard to get the feedback in it. But you understand what it'll do now, and you go, "Oh, this is sort of the equivalent here." So the training approach becomes much different in Mongolian wrestling, even though like the throws and the styles are actually very similar, Mongolian wrestling to Chinese wrestling, and they're both jacketed wrestling. And again, like the techniques are really very similar. There's maybe some differences here and there. But in the same way that you could take 4 different, Shuai Jiao schools and they're going to all do inner hooking or dehe, and they're all going to do it a little bit differently because that's the way that their coaches like it and teach it and things like that, right? But it's the approach and the training, like the things that they emphasize, right? There's still like an athleticism that comes with everything, but when you get down to like the differences, Chinese wrestling to Mongolian wrestling, the things that they emphasize for gripping, the things that they emphasize for sensitivity, understanding setups and things like that starts to really split apart. So I know that's a whole like lot to be said because again, like they seem very similar in some ways, but they actually, when you get closer and closer to the systems, you start to really see that those differences totally define them as their own sort of approaches that interact with each other, but still stand alone as, Bökh for Mongolian wrestling. And then even then inner and outer Mongolian wrestling has a different feeling and approach. And then, Shuai Jiao is Chinese wrestling, all jacketed wrestling, all amazing arts that, are, like I said, have a very intertwined history and sort of vein in what they do and the feeling of it. But it's definitely an interesting study to say the least.
And how do you differ your teaching method from the Mongolian style to the Shuai Jiao? Do you incorporate both together, or maybe you per days, like one day or per week, you do a style, or how does it work?
So for like our system for our school, we have 2 days where we have like dedicated Bökh studies. And then we have 3 days that we have Shuai Jiao for, just a regular Shuai Jiao class. And again, like for myself, I'm just, in the last 5 years or so, 4 years, really starting to study Bökh. I did interact with it very briefly when I was younger. I took a trip when I was in my teens to China. I made my way to Inner Mongolia. It was the first time that I ever saw Inner Mongolian wrestling or anything like that. And I tried it a little bit and I did terrible and I didn't like it because it wasn't Kung Fu. And then I just sort of like put it on the shelf as, everybody must know what this is. Not really understanding that it was actually a very rare thing. But so for us, our study of Bökh is we have like an hour in during the week, and then a longer session on the weekend where like our team really trains it. Our competitive team trains it, and again, like the jackets are very different. So that's one of the barriers is like learning the grips and stuff. So we have a lot of folks here that have some of the jackets, but they're very hard to come by. They're custom made. They come from Inner Mongolia. We have a couple of the Outer Mongolian jackets. And then like our normal program is just sort of Chinese style wrestling, right? So we have the approach, a lot of our approach in how we teach Shuai Jiao is influenced by Bökh, the Mongolian wrestling. But we're teaching it a little more, separate, with an understanding that like, hey, these things, once you get down to it, like are very similar in those like initial approaches, but then the study itself starts to split apart a little bit more. And the more you study Bökh, the better your Shuai Jiao is going to be. But our classes, it's a little bit more separated because we're still just barely scratching the surface for Mongolian wrestling.
Interesting. And how would you differ the different styles of Shuai Jiao? For example, there's a Baoding Kuai Jiao, which is the one that I practice. You already explained a lot about the Mongolian style, but how would it be like, Shanxi, Beijing, the difference between these styles, if you could explain a little bit, if you have any.
Sure. So the thing that is interesting is like, for the most part, you could say like in China now, like in October, I was able to go to Baoding, China and compete in the World Shuai Jiao Games for the World Shuai Jiao Federation, which was an amazing opportunity. And I got to wrestle with people from all over the world and a bunch from the Chinese teams and stuff like that, compete, take third at a world-class tournament. Mm-hmm. It was really an amazing opportunity. But something that you notice is like, they are doing what Zhongguo Shuai Jiao, like Chinese style Shuai Jiao. They don't differentiate so much in those sort of arenas and in those spaces for like Beijing style Shuai Jiao and Baoding style Shuai Jiao and Tianjin. And there's you might say like your coach is from Beijing, but the style isn't quite as like differentiated as it is outside of China. That's something that you see is a little bit more prevalent here. And I think some of that is because, right, and my history is not great. There are people that certainly can wax poetic much better than I could on this particular topic, but like the Shampuyan, the imperial wrestlers, sort of when that ceased to be and a lot of the teachers started teaching in different areas and it kind of separated into these more regional styles. When that made its way to the West, or, like Baoding went to Taiwan and like teachers from there came over to the West and started teaching, it was a little bit more like, well, I'm from this area. These are the attributes that this area started to develop, even though like the style itself is not necessarily different in its approach. Like a lot of the Baoding style, for instance, is mixed with a lot of kung fu and like military systems. So you see it from like punching, and there's a little bit more of like an aggressive, like almost self-defense take to it, but like it still throws, right? But it's mixed with things to become a little bit more its own unique sort of standalone style. The Beijing style tends to be very like detail oriented. It's a lot of like hand fighting and understanding body mechanics and getting like a really refined movement. Right, you have styles that are no jacket styles of Shuai Jiao. Things like Taiji Shuai Jiao, which is like the throws from without a jacket from like a push hands position, right? Like a Mongolian style Shuai Jiao, which is taking the practices of Bökh and putting it into like a competitive format for Shuai Jiao, things like that. So here we tend to see more like, oh, this is a unique system of wrestling, right? But it's just funny to note that that's more of like a, well, this is where it came from, but back where it came from, things have mixed a whole lot more, because you might train in Beijing for a while, and then you might go to Tianjin, and you might go to Baoding and train there, and you would have multiple coaches from multiple areas that would be giving you different takes on things, and so it's actually less split that you'll see once you kind of get out and away from what we have here. And here it's a little bit more like kung fu styles, right? Like, because it's like schools. So like, are you going to a praying mantis school? And you say, well, this is praying mantis style. This is a hungar style. This is crane. This is, chen chen. This is, whatever your unique sort of approach is. And we think so much like Shuai Jiao so closely to like a traditional kung fu school, that we like the differentiation of, well, this is Beijing style Shuai Jiao because it comes from this area and our teachers came from this lineage and things like that. But I think largely, again, like the understanding is that Shuai Jiao is a wrestling system, right? It's a system that you have a sport that you can attach to, and we're all trying to learn sort of an application of something. And so the styles are just ways of organizing information. Like, okay, we're gonna learn these stances and these movements and these throws in this maybe ranking system or this order, but we're all trying to get to the same stuff. That's sort of my note and sort of take on the styles that we see and some of the things that we see that are specific to those styles.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Congratulations for last year. I saw the post. I saw the tournament. You guys did amazing. I was very proud of you guys. Like, yes, these guys are doing great, especially being, as you said, like, it's a world tournament. So the best of the best are going there and practicing and competing. You guys did excellent results. Congrats.
Thank you.
Talking about competition, what would you say is the biggest mistakes people does, when they compete?
Biggest mistakes when they compete?
Yeah.
There is somewhat of a lack of understanding like competition strategies, right? So again, this comes down to like the coaches and the schools and the approach of those schools, because they may not all be super competition oriented, but there are some basics that we have seen, just like what you would see in boxing, right? There's like some basic rules of like, oh, you're a right-handed fighter, put your left side in front, put your hands up like this. Like, there may be other guards, but we have some basics in combat sports that have become the industry standards for like, hey, this gives you the best opportunity to interact with this sport in a competitive format. So things like your stance and your guard, your basic gripping strategies, like understanding that there's a little bit of a checklist to what you want to do when you actually get into a ring, right? You get onto a mat and you have an opponent in front of you. It's not just, well, run at them and try to do the techniques that you've learned, right? You want to start having some like competition strategies. What should you do first? What should you do second? What do you do if this is happening? A lot of this, I can say probably the number one thing that people should focus on is the grip fighting. Understanding grip fighting, understanding what grips you want to get first, why you want to get them, what they do, how you can manipulate the jacket in a certain way, what to do if someone's grabbing you a certain way. Because this is like the glue that gets you access to the end result, right? It's the thing that happens before you start throwing someone. And if you don't understand the gripping against somebody that does, they're going to be more relaxed. They're going to be able to keep you out. They're going to be able to move you. Better grips means better control, better setups, and that gives you a better opportunity to execute the technique, execute the throw. So again, like competition strategies, like the biggest mistakes is just like not having an understanding that there's some basics that will really help you specifically in competition, right? It's not so much about the training. It's not so much about the throws or the techniques. Everybody has their own version of that. And again, that's the fun part of competition is like, well, I have this overhead and I have this hand blocking technique and you have yours. Let's see who can kind of get like, how do you do yours? How do I do mine? And getting to share that at a high level in competition. But grip fighting, basics, like really just basics for competition. People will go into competition not knowing that. So they may be like a high level practitioner, but as a competitor, they don't quite have like their grounding in what to do. And then it can be a little bit disheartening because you're not sure why you can't get your material to work in a way that you want to, right? Or maybe it did work and you don't know why it worked that time, and then it doesn't work the next time because there's some basics there that are starting to miss. This is like a tricky thing to get right, because again, you don't know what you don't know. But there's certainly a lot to be said about prepping somebody for competition and just making sure that you know kind of what those industry standards are outside of your group or outside of your area or outside of the country even. Look at things on the world stage, look at things happening where Shuai Jiao is really big and see what are they doing consistently, kind of across the board, and making sure that we're like keeping up with those standards to the best of our ability. But largely that's what we're trying to do with like our program, and our competition team and myself is trying to get a little closer to getting our heads sort of above water on that, and staying, up to date on what's happening, and make it a little bit more apparent that there's more we can be doing.
It's amazing. Do you believe that Shuai Jiao is underappreciated compared, inside of the Chinese martial arts community compared to other grappling systems like judo and sambo? I said that because, again, going a little bit back where we started our interview, there's people like my Sifu, he hates this. Like my Sifu from Brazil, Sifu Diego, like when you see people promoting, oh no, Shuai Jiao is the Chinese judo. He gets so frustrated. I get so frustrated too. So do you think, it's a lack of expressing the art in a sense of promoting correctly, or how do you think is this underappreciation, if there's underappreciation by the Chinese martial arts community there are?
Yeah, this for sure. So this is something that comes up a lot, and like even some of my teachers for sure look at things like Sanda and Shuai Jiao, and they maybe have like a little feeling one way or another towards it. But I get it a little, right? Like it's this idea that like, well, this feels like it's sportifying a traditional art that's like a little more serious in that way, right? So if we're saying that some of these traditional arts are coming from like a warring background, where like this is the thing that's going to keep you safe in the ancient battle in ancient times, and it's so important to have these like really devastating techniques and a full understanding of what violence is and what fighting and everything is going to be like, and then you're putting rules to it and you're putting points to it, and it feels like maybe that's like a watering down of an overall system that has more to think about, right? So this is simple, right? You look at something like Shuai Jiao coming from Kung Fu, and you could say, yeah, but you're not punching, you're not kicking, you're not locking, you're not grabbing the vital points and things like that. So when that's the case, you can see maybe where that approach comes from, but and that's where like some of the underappreciation is coming in. We didn't really have a good unified sort of community with some of this stuff because it came from a lot of our traditional things, whereas like judo has a much better, in my opinion, like unification for rules and competition and like building a competition sport around their style, whereas we kind of have like a traditional background that this is then like the sport version. Even in Sanda is the same thing, right? So there's a little like this, like maybe an older generation having a little bit of an issue with wanting to help promote it, but the big thing is it comes with right. It comes down to being able to start to actually apply some of the concepts that you're talking about. So if you have like punching and kicking and throwing and locking, but you're never pressure testing any of it, and you could find Shuai Jiao as a way of at least understanding the wrestling component to it. This is a little bit like what I was saying with Sanda. Like the wrestling component can be really difficult to learn in Sanda, but if you do Shuai Jiao, you can develop the feeling for it and then apply it much more effective and efficiently in Sanda. Well, you could take that same formula and say, well, listen, if you have wrestling in a traditional art and you take all the other stuff out of it so that you have a format where you can really, it's going to be different. Your stance is going to be different because it's not going to have some of the things in mind, but the feeling of getting these things to work will develop to a higher level, right? Not everybody understands that. And so I can see kind of on both sides, like, hey, this is being pressure tested. This is a good thing that we should be doing. And I also see, well, you're sportifying something that shouldn't be a sport. So this is kind of middle of the road. I personally think everybody should be doing Shuai Jiao and Sanda. That's why I teach it. Like, I have a traditional background and I still train traditionally, but it's a way of being able to interact with this material in a way you can really feel like, well, can you actually throw somebody? Can you actually put them on the ground when they don't want to, right? That is a much more difficult thing to do than people understand. Even just Sanda, right? Hitting someone in the head, hitting someone in the face is harder to do than we realize when someone doesn't want you to do it. Like, finding the timing, knowing how to not telegraph, using the correct footwork, finding just the right moment to do it, especially if they're defending, especially if they're attacking back, and especially if they've been doing a lot of application for these things. It can be tougher than people realize to actually make that contact. And then even tougher still to make meaningful contact that would really stop someone, not just that you touched them, but that, right, like that punch would have enough power behind it to really do some damage. So I'm a big advocate, obviously, even in the traditional spaces, for people to train and study and understand Shuai Jiao, and to do the same thing for Sanda, even if their end goal is just understanding the traditional material better. But we don't have like that's not the general consensus across the community. We are still a little split in that particular thing. So it may take a little while for more folks to come around, but I think they will.
That's amazing. And I think our last question is, what do you think is a challenge in promoting to the young generation? You know, we living in a generation where people, oh yeah, the only thing that works is MMA. Oh, because it's not in the UFC, it does not work. So what do you think would be the most challenging these days? Do you think it's just maybe the promotion on the big screen when it comes about MMA professional fighters, or would be more, more related to our last question?
So, I mean, yes, of course, like, you see things like the UFC is probably like the biggest promotion for martial arts in a way that people understand, like, oh, I can turn the TV on and I can see these people doing fighting, and it's very popular in the US at the very least, right? And so that's what kids are going to see. And if it's not in their immediate view, it's really not on a younger generation to like find something that's more obscure. So if we want, as people within the community, if we want that to be more relevant, we need to produce content and get people to a place where it is seen, right? Now, the good note on that is we do have some fighters that have come through and that are still fighting right now that have a Chinese martial arts background, that have a Sanda background, that have a Shuai Jiao background. Now, there's not as many of them. Like, we're definitely outnumbered from other sports, other arts for sure. But the more we can do to kind of like say, hey, look, these people are coming from our community to an MMA setting. And then that certainly helps, promote these arts a little bit, to say like, hey, look, this can be applied in these places that you're seeing, relevant martial arts in this particular setting. The other side of that is, as coaches, as program directors, as school owners, we need to be thinking a little bit about like, well, what are people looking for? And am I providing something that is modern and up to date, that is relevant to what people want, right? Because I can understand you've been taught a thing a certain way and it looks a certain way and it's done a certain way, and you're trying to preserve that is one thing, right? If that's your goal, then that's perfectly fine. But if you're trying to promote, you need to be able to provide something that is somewhat similar to what people are looking for. If someone sees something in MMA and they go, hey, I want to learn that, but I want to learn something unique. Maybe I don't want to just do Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu, because that's like the two really big things that we see. And you do a little search, because again, everything's online, and you can jump on Reddit and go, oh, Shuai Jiao is a thing. And you look for a Shuai Jiao school, and it's like, okay, so here's a school that says they do Shuai Jiao. And it's maybe it's a kung fu school that does like a Shuai Jiao night or something like that, right? Or it's like a small group that meets once, and that's not going to be enough for someone to go, well, that's going to get me to my end goal of being like an MMA fighter, right? So we need, if we want to develop serious practitioners, or if we want to be like a serious thing for people to be interested in, we have to provide serious training. We have to provide serious training opportunities. We have to have programs that are, really well fleshed out, that have like an athletics side to it, that have good conditioning, that have sound fundamentals and basics, and can also show you, hey, you're going to start here and go here and go here and get to this point. And if you're interested in fighting competitively, if that's what you're seeing on TV, and everybody thinks they're interested in doing that. That's a whole other conversation, whether they actually want to do it or not. But you have to be able to say, hey, we have a competition team. Like, we have a little local competition we go to every year, and a few folks travel maybe to a few states away and do this. And we have a nationals that happens here. Like, for us, our nationals for Shuai Jiao happens in Ohio every year. And on the East Coast, we've got a couple of competitions. We've been hosting one in Boston the last couple of years. We've linked up with New York Shuai Jiao to help promote and host a competition there. So the East Coast has a couple of Shuai Jiao competitions that are happening. And you could say, hey, like, that's our goal. We're, as a group, as a team, as a program, we offer the opportunity to get you to a competition level. And if you want to go to a national level, there are opportunities. And if you do well at the national level, we have a US team that goes to these international events, right? You have to be able to show somebody that there's a path and that there's like a reason to go from one thing to another. And that's what's going to be attractive to, again, that younger generation. But if you're not providing that, if you're, not creating those spaces, then it's going to be hard to switch people back to maybe like the old way of doing things when they have such easy access to seeing something in the UFC or in MMA, and then going to their local MMA gym going like, wow, this looks more like what I saw on TV, so this is what I want. So that's sort of like our big challenge as like the generation that is starting to provide those spaces, is we have to make sure that we're also relevant to people that they actually want to come in.
Absolutely amazing. Coach Tye, I want to thank you so much for sharing so much knowledge, for sharing so much wisdom. This for me was a Shuai Jiao workshop, or seminar, online seminar. Thank you so much for showing, so much dedication and also promoting with excellence and honor. And I would like to leave a few minutes for you to promote yourself, promote your school. Yeah, I know they also have an online program. I've seen really good reviews out there. And also, if you have any competitions or anything, or any seminars or anything going on, please feel free to share.
Oh, sure. So you can find me online on Instagram. Coach Tye Tonkin is my handle for like my personal coaching page. I'm the head coach and owner of two main programs based here in Boston. One is Sanda Fighting Arts, and you can find that at Sanda_fighting_arts on Instagram and Facebook. And Boston Shuai Jiao, or Boston Bökh and Shuai Jiao, Boston_Bökh, BOKH _Shuai Jiao. And those are like our programs that we run. And I teach out of a school called Wuan Martial Arts. And we're based in Watertown, Massachusetts, which is just outside of Boston, a little north of Boston. But you can find us online through all of those handles and hashtags on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all of those things. We're at a lot of the major competitions on the East Coast. Shuai Jiao has a national competition held through the U.S. Shuai Jiao Association in Cleveland, Ohio. That's next month in April. We'll be there. We've been the last 3 years. We always have a team there. I'm always there. And, we're a super friendly, open group. So if anybody is ever in the Boston area, if anybody is ever in any of the competitions in the fall, we hold one here in Boston for Shuai Jiao, and New York. Last month we had one. We'll be doing again next year. So if anybody's coming to these competitions or interested, you can always reach out to us on our social media. We are very open and friendly, because our main goal is to be able to promote these arts and get people more interested and more involved. Come say hello at competitions, and find us online.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. For those who are listening through Spotify, I will put the link on YouTube. Make sure that you guys go to the description of this video, and you're going to have access for everything. So I'm going to request Coach Tye for those links to have easy access. Again, Coach Tye, thank you so much. I appreciate for your time. Thank you for being part of this show. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you also for watching this show and listening to this show, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.